So it's hello everyone, and we're so pleased that so many people have signed up and are attending today. We will be recording a session and we will be emailing it out to everyone that's registered directly, and we will put it on our website so you can access it on our blog as well. A quick note just to mention, if you can all ensure that you've got your full screen enlarged so that you can see all of the slides correctly. If it's on the small screen, sometimes you may not be able to see everything. Ooh, my light's just gone out. And yeah, as I mentioned in my email, if you are a subscriber with us or if you're looking at Languagenut for the very first time, you can book a full walkthrough of our resources through our website, through the book a demo page. So if it's just to get the most out of your subscription, or if you do want to get set up on a full trial as well, then you can do. So let me introduce you to our two presenters today. First of all, we've got Zoe Thorne, who has taught MFL and EFL in France, Germany, and is co-author of a number of the French and German IGCSE. Zoe is our head of content here at Languagenut, and Elaine Gelder, who's got over 30 years of experience as a teacher across modern languages, EAL, UK and across Germany. And her most recent role has been Senior Director at the Delta Trust Academies, who are one of the largest and highest performing multi-academy trusts in the UK, who has recently joined Languagenut as our Education Director. So I'll hand it over to you guys. Just to mention, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A function, and then at the end of the session, we'll run through as many of your questions as we can.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Lovely. Okay, well, let's get started. So yeah, this is the first in our series of the MFL SOS series that we're doing. So this one is on practical tips for social distance learning, which is obviously a massive thing that we've all suddenly had to learn how to do. And on that note, I would like to say thank you so much to all of you that are here. I know that, yeah, we've had over 350 people register for this. I know not everybody can make it. Some people are actually watching this later in the inset sessions, but I think it's amazing that after probably the most challenging year of anyone's teaching career, I think, none of us have taught through a global pandemic before, that you've had to relearn to do your job in a completely different way. And not only have you risen to that challenge, you're using up your free time or your PPA time to come and do a CPD session to try and do it better. I think that's absolutely amazing. So thanks very much for taking the time to come and see this. So we've put together, you know, from teachers that we've talked to, different challenges that teachers are facing at the moment. And there's also a QR code on the screen as well for the link to the survey if you haven't had a chance to do it yet already. And these are the challenges that we've come up with, and I can already see from the responses that are coming in from the survey. Yeah, Elaine and I, we're trying to kind of adapt this slightly as we go. You know, we're both teachers we're used to adapting things on the fly depending on the needs of our students, so that's what we're doing. So I can already see that the biggest ones you're coming up with are not being allowed to walk around the classroom. So that's most people have that problem. Not being able to do one-to-one speaking, not being able to share resources, not having enough lesson time. Those are the big ones that are coming in, and also teaching live and remote lessons at the same time. So those are the biggest challenges that you're facing at the moment. So we're going to try to give you as many practical tips as possible to deal with those. We've taken these kind of 6 areas that we're going to be looking at mainly. So improving speaking skills, transitioning between classrooms, finding activities that you can do both in the classroom and remotely, trying to make the most of your reduced lesson time after lockdowns and isolations and so on. How do you do assessment and tracking progress when you might not be allowed to mark books anymore? And what do you do if you suddenly have to set emergency cover or remote lessons at very short notice? So these are things that we're going to be looking at. I'm going to try to make it as practical as possible. So I'm going to start off with talking about improving speaking and pronunciation. So this is really hard. You know, lots of us use core repetition, singing, all those kind of things, and suddenly those things aren't available anymore. So what can we do about it? One thing you can do is using online dictionaries. So you can actually play audios. There's actually one it's probably the only time in my life I'm ever going to say this, there is a use for Google Translate that you can use. Not for the way the kids use it, but the fact that with Google Translate, you can type in a word and you can press, there's a little audio button. You can press that and have the audio playing through. And that means that you can have this audio playing instead of projecting, or if it's depending on where you are in the country and what or in the world and what your school's policies are. You might be wearing, I know some teachers are wearing masks and visors, not so much in the UK but elsewhere. If you're covered with a visor and it's harder to make yourself clear, then you can use kind of audio clips. We also have them on Languagenut as well, so we have all our vocabulary has a kind of learn screen with these embedded audio clips for native speakers, and you could use these at home as well. So if students want to listen to them, again, they could also do that with an online dictionary as well. And we also have, in order to practice that kind of pronunciation, we have voice recognition software in our vocab games, which means that a student they hear the word, they repeat it, and the voice recognition software translates what they've said into text. And if they've made a pronunciation mistake, so for example here they should have said rose, but if they said like rosa or rosa, it will come up. You can see that it's got that different spelling, so it'll give them instant feedback as to what they're saying wrong, which is really useful when you're not allowed to walk around the classroom and go and actually hear what they're saying. Without using Languagenut, you could also set them as homework or on their own devices. You could get them to listen to their own feedback, or listen to the online dictionary or Google Translate or whatever, listen to the audio clip and repeat, and then they could use self feedback as well, to check, or self-assessment. The next aspect of improving speaking and pronunciation is improving fluency. So as you know, lots of pedagogical theories at the moment have said, the way to achieve fluency is through automation. So they need to know this stuff as so well, they need to drill it, and of course that's not always easy. So sentence builders are something that are very popular at the moment, and that's something which you can use still social distance by putting them up on the board if you've got an interactive whiteboard. So you can use sentence builders. I know it's harder because you're not allowed to have speaking mats, a lot of teachers, that are passed around, but you can still have them on the board, or you can display them on Google Classroom or whatever that you're using if you're doing remote lessons. And sentence builders really allow students to keep practicing in a very kind of low stakes way and using chunks, and they're rearranging sentences. There are loads and loads of things out there for activities that you can do with sentence builders, but some things that you could do as well is popcorn speaking. So this is something which I used to use with my students, maybe you do already, and it's a game that you can adapt. You can do it either in the classroom or you can do it on video. So the idea is that you have your sentence builder up there, and the teacher says a sentence using those chunks and then picks a student. That student in the old version stands up, and they have a choice. They can either change one thing that the teacher said, so everyone has to listen and they change one thing but still using the sentence builder, or they can translate it. So there's a little bit of differentiation there, self-chosen differentiation. They then say a new sentence from the sentence builders, and they choose another student. They sit down, the next one stands up. So that's why it's called popcorn. So the idea is in the classroom, everybody's popping up and down like popcorn. This can also be done remotely. You can do that on, if you're using Zoom or Teams or whatever video conferencing software that you're using, you can just, instead of people standing up, you can just choose that person, they unmute themselves and say it. So this is, again, as much as possible, it's good to be using resources that you can do both live and in the classroom, because you don't want to be reinventing the wheel for any remote lessons. Another thing that you can do, which works both analog and digital, to practice speaking and really get this automation that leads to fluency, is what we call tent dialogues. So again, some of you might have used these before. I've got an example here for German, because I can see from the survey that we've got a mixture of French, Spanish and German teachers here, so trying to use all the languages. And this is a conversation, simple dialogue, inviting someone out to the cinema and agreeing when they're going to meet. So obviously a topic that comes up in most curricula. And the way this works, the traditional version would have been with bits of paper which is folded over like a tent. That's why it's called a tent dialogue, and A is on one side and B is on the other side. Obviously that's harder now, but you can still put it on the board. So you can have this AB, you can have obviously a longer one. This is just a short one for demonstration. And first of all, they do the dialogue, they read it, simple. Then as you remove the scaffolding, they then change the underlying bit. So instead of saying möchtest du ins Kino gehen, you can say möchtest du in die Stadt gehen, for example. So using the sentence builder to replace bits. They practice that. Then what's really nice with a board, which you can digitally, or again, if you're sharing a screen, is you can then start to put little sort of ink blots or something. You know, you can either do it with a whiteboard pen or you can do it with PowerPoint. You can put little ink blots over parts of the dialogue, so they have to keep practicing it and do more and more of it from memory. So gradually removing that scaffolding. And finally, you then have the text in English. And by this point, they should have pretty much reached automation with it, and they can do it translating it. And then again, each time you can try to do it so they change the underlying parts as well. So you're just gradually removing that that scaffolding so they become really automated and really fluent with it. We also have a number of sentence building games on Languagenut, so things where you can drag things around, which again leads to that automation, which can lead to fluency. And then the last part is obviously the biggest problem that lots of you are facing. Again, I can see from the survey, is what do we do about speaking, you know, open speaking and assessing that? It's so difficult because all the things that we used to do, you know, getting all the rest of the class to do a task while you bring people up to your desk one by one to listen to them, can't do that with social distancing. And also the kind of either mock or real oral exams where you would be, we've all been there, you know, squashed in some broom cupboard or some tiny little meeting room somewhere with the student. Again, you can't do that anymore. So there are ways to get around this. One way to do it, which is what I used to do, is ask students to record MP3. So you send out a question or a photo or whatever it is, the stimulus that you want them to have, and then you ask them to record themselves. And that's quite easy to do. Most phones have that capability, even if they don't have a microphone on their computer at home, or in the library if they use library computers. And that can work really well, and it means that you can get them to record quite regularly. The problem that you can have with that is that it can be a bit of an organizational nightmare. So you have emails coming in with you know, MP3s attached, and then somebody has managed to send some kind of file that's not known to man nor beast. You've no idea how they recorded this, you've never seen it before, and you're trying to keep on top of everything and which recording is from whom and so on. So it does take a lot of organization. There are also other websites you can use, there's Flipgrid and Seesaw and things like that, which are free websites you can use for students to record. Again, another thing you have to be careful about is the GDPR and data protection. So some of them allow students to see each other's recordings, and that is really going to depend on your class whether you think that's appropriate. And yeah, just checking that they have the GDPR laws in place that you need for your safeguarding of your students. And the third problem that I definitely came across many times is trying to get spontaneity, because of course I would tell them, don't use Google Translate and read it. I want you to look at the question and just answer it straight away, record yourself. And of course they didn't. They're teenagers all around the world. Of course they use Google Translate and then read it. So we've come up with something at Languagenut. This is probably the game that I'm proudest of, because it's something that solved a problem that was a real bugbear of mine. The way it works on Languagenut is that you have a question or a photo stimulus. We've got absolute banks of hundreds of them. And once the student has set up their microphone and everything, they see it, they press start, they see the stimulus, and they have a minute, the timer starts. And we've calculated that a minute is enough time for them to think and give a substantial answer, and maybe make notes if they want to, but it's not enough time to write out a whole lovely answer, put it into Google Translate. You can't type fast enough in a minute. So this way you will get some semblance of a fairly spontaneous response to that stimulus. Then they press submit, it's sent to you, it's saved, and then as the teacher you can then log into your admin area. You can see all of your classes recordings in one place. You just listen, give feedback, go to the next one, listen, give feedback. You can also give either written or verbal feedback. So the verbal one is quite nice if you want to, you can just record a recording of yourself, and that's really handy if you want to give pronunciation correction, which again, normally in the old days they would come up and you could just give them verbal feedback there and then. But here what you can do is you can say, oh, look, I can see you're struggling with the U sound, so you could give some tips on, you know, they're saying ooh and they need to be saying oo, and so on, so they can really hear that difference. So this is the area that we've got on helping with speaking. I'm going to move over to Elena to talk about aiding transitions between the classroom.
Thank you, Zoe. And I think the last slide that Zoe showed there would be every teacher's dream, to be able to do this with their students, particularly with the new 2021 requirements for the endorsed speaking. There you could actually build up a really good evidence bank for your students to be able to then access that at home, and you can then give a really good idea to the student and also to the exam board as to what grade your student would get, either pass, merit or distinction, if you are doing the GCSE course. So one of the things which has been really useful tonight to be able to do this is not only that can we share ideas amongst each other, and obviously some of the really great stuff that's going on Facebook and Twitter, and some of our ideas tonight have come from there, thanks to those people who have put things online over the past few months, and also Languagenut, which has some amazing opportunities for us to use. One of the big things I know from my experience of teaching at the moment, and also with my colleagues that work in the trust that I work for, is that we have students who are in classrooms, and teachers have to travel to the classroom. Some schools I know are in a position where the teacher is able to stay in the classroom and the pupils come to them. But from my experiences of speaking to teachers in the UK and across the world, this is a very this is not often happening. It's mostly the teacher that's moving. So obviously you arrive at a classroom and you have children already there waiting for you, and the first thing you're going to have to do is to get them into their learning as quickly as possible. Now, if you work in a school where the children have got their own devices or are working on iPads, or maybe you're lucky enough to have them in an IT room, then this will be absolutely straightforward for you. The students can get into the habit of accessing their own Languagenut account and being able to get straight away onto a Do Now starter, which you can set in advance. And if you look at the second bullet point there, you can assign a task before the class on the set start date feature, so the pupils can get onto that straight away as soon as you walk into the classroom. And they may already be working on that. If that's not the case, then I know some of you can quickly access that. But one of the things that my staff have been doing, and what I know a lot of staff have tried to use to consider this, is to use an assignment and ask the students to do the assignment the night before. So say you have a lesson on a Monday, you ask them to do it on the Sunday evening, and they then go into your lesson on the Monday, and they should hopefully have some of the vocabulary in their heads. And as a low stakes assessment, which is a kind of quizzing and getting students into the habit of assessing themselves. And for those of you that work in the UK, you will know that Ofsted loves low stake assessments, because they are assessments which can test how much students can remember over a number of months, weeks, years, and there is no anxiety around the assessment. It's very low stakes. There's no marks taken in. It's just getting the students into the habit of remembering things and being able to move forward with their learning. And obviously you can set an activity which is connected to some prior learning that you've done in a lesson, or maybe something that you've done a few weeks before, and you want to try and see how much they can remember. So they can come to your lesson, you say, right, last night you did this homework. What I want you to do is to jot down as much vocabulary, as much grammar, as many phrases as you can remember from the session that you did on Languagenut the night before, and then use that as a starter activity, which will then hopefully get them into the learning. And whilst you're setting up yourself with either connecting your laptop or logging onto the computer, doing the register, all the sort of beginning of lesson things we have to get on with, the students are engaged straight away in something that they have been doing. Okay. You move on to the next slide for me, please, Zoe. Okay. As well as Languagenut, it's really important in this session, as you've heard from Zoe already, that we kind of think about some other things as well, which will give you an idea of things that you can do as a starter activity. So if you can get your students into the habit at the end of your lesson, what we used to call the old-fashioned plenary, and lots of schools call them different things now. It's normally the last 5 or 10 minutes of your lesson when you're getting towards the end of a lesson and you think, right, what can I set them to use as a starter in the next lesson. So asking the pupils to make a bingo card using some vocab and phrases from the lesson, which in a starter activity of the next lesson when you have them, you can get them to get this out, and you can be, as you're doing your initial activities at the beginning, setting up your laptop, whatever you need to do, you can just be calling out some of the bingo card phrases that you know the students will have used because they will be directly related to the lesson that you taught in the previous session. If you don't fancy a bingo card, they could make a noughts and crosses game, or as we call it in some in America, I know is tic-tac-toe. And again, they could access this and play this with a partner. They could have made a noughts and crosses game with pictures in the target language or in English, and then they can play each other to see who could win, scoring points as they go. You could have also asked them to draw what they've learned in the lesson today. Some of your students may well have a little bit more artistic leniencies there, and as a result of that, in the next lesson they've got to put what they drew in the target language. So it's recall, it's making them think, what did we do in the last lesson? Or they could even swap the picture with their partner and get them to describe it either orally or written. And again, you could, the first 3 bullet points, you could ask your students to do one of the 3, and that will allow you to show that you're showing differentiation in your planning, because you've given the ownership of the choice to the pupil to say to do something for their starter activity. Another thing you could do is to ask them to prepare a mind map to show what they've learned in the lesson, and then they revisit this at the beginning of the lesson. Again, the mind map could be in English or the target language, and again they could have to translate that into the opposite language, or even give it to someone else on their row or in their pair, because I know that most schools are sitting in rows now with social distancing to keep things easier for people to face forward, and there's no hassle then with breathing out and all of the things that we normally do in our classrooms. Another thing you could do on the 5th bullet point there is to write a short paragraph in the target language or English. Again, that's a little bit maybe more for your more able students, or for the students who are in Key Stage 4 or Key Stage 5. And then at the start of the next lesson, their partner has to translate it orally or again written. And the final example here is to design an exercise to test your peers' understanding of the main points of the lesson. Again, it's just a little bit low stake assessment quiz to get them to just recall what they've done in a previous lesson. Okay, Zoe, I'll hand back to you for the next session.
Zoe, I think you're muted at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks.
Lip reading was getting there, but
thank you. Yep, easily done. Yeah, great. So yeah, thank you. That leads on really nicely to the next point, which is on hybrid activities, because what we want to avoid as teachers kind of having to plan 2 completely separate lessons. So for students at home and students who are live, and I know that I can see from the survey that lots of you having to do these simultaneously or synchronously. So what we want to do is try to find things that you can do both at the same time, or at least so you don't have to plan it twice. And actually, lots of these starters can be done if you've got students who are dialing in, and if they are live, you can get some of them to be actually testing some of the people in the class, and vice versa. So we've got a few ideas here for things that you can do that work either analog, if you like, or digitally, and live or remote. And one of the things that you can do is to try to find creative ways to make the activities that we used to do suitable for social distancing. So there are a few ideas. One of them is delayed dictation. So in a way, this is a way you can get around to not really being able to do running dictation. Running dictations were one of my favorite things. I used to love doing those. But obviously, because you can't have students walking or running around the classroom anymore, you need to find a way to have that game. And the way you can do that is you have a dictation, and instead of you dictating and then them just writing it as a standard traditional one, you make them hold it in their memories, so 1 sentence at a time for a few seconds, and you give them some kind of distraction thing. You can make them hum, or just make them chant something or whatever you like, but something to hold them for 10-20 seconds, and then you let them write, which is, in a way, it's the equivalent of the student who is running backwards and forwards, having read, and then telling their partner. And this is a way just to make dictation a little bit more fun. Plus, it also helps them with retrieval practice and getting them to keep that in their short-term memory and practice working with chunks or sentences, which is really important so that you move on from just vocabulary. So that can be done equally live or remotely. Another thing is, we mentioned before that obviously choral repetition doesn't really work anymore, but you can do things with what we call skywriting or lip reading. So you can get a student to, or you can either, you can write the word in the air and they've got to guess it. This can be done as pair work, or it can be done teacher-led, and also lip reading. So let's take advantage of the social distancing that we have to have. If people can't get too close, get one student, or you can mouth a word and the other person has to guess what they've said. And that actually is a really nice way to get them focusing on the mouth sounds, actually, in a way they probably wouldn't normally really pay that much attention to, because focusing on those mouth sounds is a really good way to make their pronunciation correct. So, for example, with that U sound that you get in French and German, a lot of the times they just see it's a U, and they think it's like an English U. Well, actually, if they see your lip shape is an U, it's like you're playing a flute, and they can really think about the difference between, for example, saying vu and saying vous, and they can see that in a way that they might not be able to normally. Another game that you can play is trapdoor. So it's one lots of you might have played before. So you have a kind of text, and every so often you get 3 or 4 options, and you or a student, if you're doing it as pair work, secretly chooses an option from each one, writes it down, then the other person has to start reading. So, pour mes vacances de rêve, je logerai dans un hôtel de 5 étoiles. And if they get it right, they can carry on. And if they get it wrong, they have to go back to the beginning and start again, which is a lovely, sneaky way of getting them to repeat over and over and again, without them realizing that's what they're doing, because it's dressed up as a game. And this can easily be done distance. You can have that up on the board, or you can display that on your computer screen if you're sharing a screen, and you can be doing that in breakout rooms or whatever, and you can have one student doing it at a time. There are so many different ways that you can make that suitable for your situation. And then another game that we came up with is one pen, one die, which is, in the old time, you would have students in pairs sharing a pen and a die, and obviously can't do that anymore, but you can still do it with each student having a pen, their own pen, and then using an online die. And there are so many here. There's one link on the slides already, but there are so many if you Google them. Again, you can do this online. You can do this in the classroom up on the smart board, and you just keep rolling. And then once it gets to a 6, then that student has to put their pen down, and the other person can start doing the translations. It would probably have to be up separate translations in their books rather than on the same worksheet. But again, there are creative ways around it. Again, Languagenut have come up with some suggestions as well. So we have lots of activities, fully interactive games for vocab, reading and listening comprehensions, open writing and speaking, translation and grammar. And obviously anything that's done digitally is socially distanced and safe, because students will do it on their own devices, either if they have phones or tablets, or you have a computer room or whatever. Actually, lots of these can also be done up on the smart board as well, with students writing it down. Obviously, the advantage of them doing it digitally directly is that everything apart from open writing and speaking is automatically marked. We are a great believer that extra drilling and extra practice should not mean extra work for the teacher. So you can set them you can set them 18 vocab tasks if you want to, in practicing different skills, so they drill it over and over again and you don't have to mark any of them. So that's what we're trying to save time as well. Yeah, and so I think that's my own. Do you have anything to say?
Sorry, over to me. Yeah, thank you. Great stuff. And I know that the one pen, one die has been around a little while, thanks to whoever it was that put it on Facebook. And MFL Matters is a really good site for finding lots of resources. I think Marta put in the chat there, she was wondering where we got a lot of ideas from. I just think it's you know, I've got over 32 years experience in the classroom, working alongside some very challenging students, and I know that Zoe has taught for a number of years as well. So between us, we do have a lot of experience that we can share with you, and that's the beauty of being able to put these webinars on for those of you you know, that wish to attend them. I know for a fact that a lot of students have missed a lot of time because I found that with my pupils and other colleagues as well. And one of the things that we have been really grateful of since last year, really, since the beginning of January, is being able to use something which has allowed us to get the students to work from home and be able to, as Zoe said in a previous slide, be able to self-mark, because it's enabled us to then see the progress that the pupils have made. And our schools have been involved with Languagenut now since last year, and we found a massive improvement in the way that children engage with the learning at home, because they can use their phone, they can use an iPad, they can use a tablet. Some of them stay after school to do it. Some of them even do it in the morning breakfast club. They get into school early to do this. So if you've got that facility, I would encourage you to have a demonstration of Languagenut if you haven't already got one. But certainly from what we've done is we've tried as much as possible, and you should be looking at incorporating one resource that you can use for different activities. So for example, if you do provide a really good what was it that we had in the one, the can't remember what they're called now, Zoe, the trapdoor, then use that as many times as you can for listening, for reading, for grammar, and use it for the different skills. So as we've said here in the first bullet point, outsourcing the consolidation and the revision to homework using Languagenut. Languagenut has lots of things to do with grammar. There's lots of comprehension tasks. You can create your own vocabulary that's linked to your own course books or your own schemes of learning. If you're following your own scheme, you can put everything in there. And there's already a good number of course books that are already in the site that you can just tap into if that's what you want to do. Another thing which I know a lot of schools have tried to do is this notion of flipped learning. And it's difficult with languages because you are always relying on the pupils being able to pronounce the words. Because obviously you are the person in the classroom that has the knowledge and the language knowledge, but it's difficult once they go home for the students to mimic that. Whereas if you've got access to something like Languagenut, the pupils can actually listen to the words and get the sounds in their heads before they come into the lesson. So you're flipping the learning. Instead of spending 30 minutes of the classroom time learning chunks of language, learning vocabulary, learning grammar, give the pupils the opportunity to look at that at home before they come into your classroom. And that way they've had some sight of it beforehand. And you'll find that that does have a remarkable impact upon the way the children will engage with the learning. And we've also then got another suggestion, which is to combine, as I said earlier, to combine more than one skill in each task. And if you can move to the next slide, Zoe, we've got the MAD dictation, which I know you know, Gianfranco Conti uses this, and it's something I've used for many years. It's been around a long time, just has different names, where you have you give the pupils that they tell the pupils they're going to listen to a text, and listening is always the skill that they find difficult. So you could read it at near normal speed, and then ask the pupils to write down some keywords that they hear, and then get them to pair it with another student and compare the words that they've got, and then tell them that they're going to work with that person for the rest of the lesson, of that task. Then read the text a second time. Maybe you do this a little bit more slowly, a little bit faster in some parts, and sometimes at normal speed. And again, you can use Languagenut here if you wish to use that as the language listening tool in the classroom, because the snail pace is there, which allows the language to go slower, and is really useful if you have students that struggle with listening and need to listen to it at a slower speed. And then after you've done this, you can then get the pupils to work with their partner again to try and reconstruct the text, and then a final time read it through, still varying your delivery, and then the pupils are given another chance to work with their partner. The pupils can then read aloud the text, and you can then listen to their pronunciation. You could ask individuals to read it. You could ask the class to read row by row. You could ask pairs to read it. You could ask students to read individual words, and so that everybody's getting a turn to read something, and that way you can then listen to the pronunciation without having to worry about going into the main body of the classroom and being able to listen to them and putting everyone at risk. Okay, I'll pass back to you, Zoe, I think, with the next slide.
Yeah, great, thank you, Elaine.
No
Yeah,
problem.
lovely. So then that takes us on to the next area, which is assessment and tracking progress, which, as Elaine mentioned, is quite difficult to do, and to get that kind of individual feedback and so on. And I know that I know that lots of schools are finding it really difficult to know what to do with marking. They're not being allowed to mark books, or they have this system of storing books in quarantine before they go to the teacher to mark and so on. It's all really, really difficult. So we need to find more creative ways to do assessment. One thing which you can do is using more peer assessment and self-assessment. And I think the key to that is making sure that you make it as clear as possible for the students. So that means having a very, very clear framework with examples. So not just saying, well, do they use present tense and do they use future tense and so on, but it needs to be examples of what does that look like, what a good one looks like, for example. And ideally tailored to the topic that you're doing as well, to make it really clear. And that can be really nice, actually, although it's not perfect, because obviously a student, of course, can't assess another student in the same way that you can as an expert. But it does mean they take a bit more responsibility for their own learning, and they actually really do think about what goes into making a good answer, whether that's written or spoken. And the other thing you can do is to try to use more digital tools which are tracked. So Languagenut, as an example of one of those tools, everything that the students do is tracked, and you can generate a report, so you can see at a glance what your student or your teacher or your class is doing and how they're doing. We've got it kind of color coded. You can see some examples here on the slideshow. And lots of schools are really happy about this are actually incorporating Languagenut into their school reward system. So we have class league tables and school league tables as well. So classes and students within that school or class are ranked, as well as our world ranking. And you can see from sort of various tweets, we've got quite a lot of schools that are actually running competitions each week. They're giving prizes or house points or whatever to the students who are in the top 3 or 5 or whatever each week. So it's a really nice way to kind of keep them motivated. And I know that lots of teachers have said that motivation is a really difficult thing at the moment. That's one that you could do, get that element of competition. And in an era when no one knows what's happening with exams, they're being cancelled, are they or are they not, and no one really knows what's going to count, letting students know that you are actually tracking, or not tracking, but like keeping an eye on what they're doing, and that you are actually aware of the progress that they're making, and that you're proud of the progress they're making, is so important to students at the moment, because it's so hard for them to really see what is important this year, what's the point of doing any of this. And the other thing you can do, so Elaine mentioned the speaking endorsement. So all the open writing and open speaking that they do on Languagenut is stored, so you can then have evidence of that over a period of time. So we don't know yet what's going to happen at the moment. Ofsted are saying that you won't need to provide evidence, taking that with a pinch of salt, because we don't know whether things will change. So it's really good if you can have evidence of regular work that they're doing in the different key skills throughout the year, so that if you do need to appeal anything or back up the endorsement that you've given, that's what you have then as your evidence over the year, rather than just maybe doing one. I know that some schools are doing kind of one mock oral exam in the old way, which doesn't really give that picture of progression over time. So it's a really nice way to store that. And the other thing is with the recordings as well, if you record something towards the beginning of the year or the beginning of a topic, students can also listen back to their old recordings. That really encourages them to listen back. They can record another one with their new the progress that they've made, and with new vocabulary and structures that they've learned, and they can compare the two and see, actually, I have improved a lot. It's really nice for confidence. Okay, and then that leads us into the last topic, Elaine.
Yeah, and just before we move off your last slide, Zoe, I think as well, if you are fortunate to have a foreign language assistant, you can actually use some of the work with the foreign language assistants, maybe to get them to work as well with the students on this in school if they don't have the opportunity to do this at home. And you maybe find there that the pupils will be engaging, and then they can still store their evidence as well there for that, because as Zoe said, Ofqual have made that decision that evidence is not needed, but should you have a parent who makes a complaint, and we all have those in our schools, it's useful to have that evidence at your fingertips. Okay, thank you, Zoe. Move on to the last section for the emergency cover and the remote lessons. Obviously, we will all have colleagues in our schools that have had to to stay off, either through isolating or quarantine, or maybe they've been ill themselves for all different reasons, and this can cause us lots of problems. If you have access to an IT suite where you can actually use Languagenut, that is your best case scenario. But obviously every classroom is being used at the moment to try and socially distance students, so that may not be possible. If you have a very proactive head who allows your children to use their phones in classrooms or iPads if they have them, then that again is a solution for Languagenut, because you can give them their opportunity to work on Languagenut in the classroom whilst they are being looked after by someone who may not be a linguist. You can set pre-made assignments using a quick assignment wizard, which allows work to be set, and it doesn't need a language specialist to deliver it. And here you can see some slides of how that can be done. You can set those in advance as well. If you wanted to do some assignments for the students to work at their own pace, that's a really good opportunity on Languagenut. And again, if they're working from home, that again is something which they can do, because I know that some schools require some teachers to deliver to their classroom pupils that are in school, and you might have to have students who dial in and actually be part of the lesson. Sometimes that can be a nightmare, because you may get students who don't actively engage with it, or you may find that the questions that they're putting in the chat, or depending upon which software you're using to deliver from home, whether it's Teams or Google Classroom or any of the others that are available, that can be a little bit of a distraction. So setting them work to do on Languagenut, which covers the same vocabulary, structures and grammar that you're covering in class, is absolutely great, because it means then that your students are going to come back into school and will not be behind with their learning. They will have just done it in a slightly different way to what you have delivered in the classroom. Obviously, when you are delivering in a classroom and you've got students who are at home, you need to be aware of your own minimum expectations. Your school will have a policy, I am sure of that, where the students may well not be allowed to have their cameras on and their microphones on for safeguarding requirements, as Zoe mentioned earlier. So it can be really, really challenging. So using Languagenut and this kind of thing at home is very, very useful. I think we're more or less on with that slide, Zoe, if you'd like to move on to the next one. There are lots of different things that you can set your students. I've been using the Guinness Book of Records quite a lot with my students, and asking them to find someone in the Guinness Book of Records who's famous and do some research about that person, and then present a little research topic on this when they've come back into school, which all the students then have listened to and they've asked questions about. And this can then support cultural capital, which Ofsted are very big on, because it's giving your students access to learning about other people that live in the countries where the languages that you teach are spoken. This idea, this monopoly, came from a guy called Mr. Francis, who I spoke to a few months ago. He'd made this during the first lockdown, and I know we've now got it in Spanish, French and German, and we can I'm sure we can share this, or at least give you the access to the Mr. Francis's Twitter to find some of these. But it's basically a game that your students can make at home, and it tells you here all they will need down the left hand side is a pen and a pencil and access to the internet. And you can set this for any country. It doesn't have to be the 3. It could be Italian or Russian or whatever. And basically, if you move on to the next slide, Zoe, if you wouldn't mind, please. You'll see here, this is the board game, and they shake a number, and if they land on a red, say they got 4, so they move from go to 4, they would land on which continent. They would then Google the country that they've decided to choose, find out which continent it is, and write it in there. And then they would carry on doing that. And then they would, if you just nip back to the next back a slide, Zoe, please. Sorry. Nope. No, thank you. They can then keep a note of the total money each day that they've got, and they could work at it over 7 days. You could give them, say to them, right, I want you to spend 30 minutes on this on day 1, 30 minutes on day 2. You could use that as a full week, or maybe over 3 weeks. If your students only have 2 lessons a week, they could do day 1 and day 2 in the first week, and day 3, 4 second week, and so on. And that way you have a really nice board game to work on, and the students can then bring these into the classroom afterwards and showcase them to the teacher. And maybe even once they've been in isolation for 72 hours, they could even be laminated and used as display. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind moving on to the next one, Zoe. I think that's my last slide.
Yeah. If I could just go back to one thing actually, which Elaine was mentioning with this, was I think the rule for any kind of emergency cover or cover lessons that you might be setting, and this applies actually out of a pandemic as well, is to try to have some kind of contingency plan that can be set very, very short notice, and particularly if you're ill, because we have all been there. And I think it's something you do in the early years of teaching as well, before you've got a bank of everything, is, you know, you're there and you're being sick or whatever, and you're trying to make worksheets that explain the point of the lesson and you know, have a nice progression and so on, and that can be done with a cover supervisor who isn't a linguist. And we all know that cover supervisors hate doing MFL lessons because they feel it's the hardest one to do if they don't have the knowledge. So you really need to think about how you could not necessarily pre-make them, but have a think about what resources you can use to very quickly have something that can be used in a lesson. And actually, when we came up with the quick assignment wizard and the pre-made assignments, actually one of the briefs that we had was, you should be able to set this with a migraine that has just started, because I have been there. So it should take 30 seconds or less, and you should be able to do it, yeah, half blind typing, and get that done and out of your way so that you can get on with recovering, because I think teachers are probably the only profession that will go in because it's easier to go in when you're ill than it is to set cover. So we're trying to redo that a little bit. That's something we're trying to do with Languagenut. But also other things that other resources that you can go to, for example, the Guinness Book of Records. If you have some kind of template you've got set up, which you can just very quickly tweak to make suitable for your topic, then that can be really useful. And of course, being aware that you might not necessarily be the one to set cover. If it is an emergency cover, you might not be able to. So something that maybe for heads of department to think about, or if you're in a primary school, I know we have some primary teachers here, someone who isn't a languages lead could be able to set that cover. So before we go on to the Q&A very quickly, I know we've got about 5 minutes left, just want to say thank you so much for coming to this this webinar, and we've got a whole series in our MEL SOS ones coming up. So the next one is going to be Elaine's one on practical tips for heads of department, heads of faculty. We've got other ones aimed at different people, NQTs, people who have suddenly found themselves being NQT mentors, if you are lucky enough to have a foreign language assistant, and so on. And I've also seen in the survey that lots of you have been giving suggestions for other topics that we could cover. So I've seen, for example, boys and MFL. That's definitely something we would love to cover. So please do ask us if there's anything particular that you can think of, either in the survey, or send us a message, or put it in the Q&A, because we want to make CPD sessions that are as relevant as possible to you. So thanks very much, and I will hand it back to Dan to do the last little bit of Q&A.
Yeah, thanks Zoe, thanks Elaine. Yeah, I've just been running through questions and things, which is great. I think some of them may have been partly answered as you've continued, But if we just sort of go into them in a bit more detail, perhaps. So the first question was about the speaking assessment being changed, obviously for 2021, which you've touched upon, and if there's any suggestions on how to assess the student. So I know from my experience speaking to a lot of teachers using Languagenut, it's the evidence gathering, but I just wondered if you had any other suggestions on how teachers can assess students before awarding the grade at the end of the year.
Do you want me to pick that one up, Zoe?
Go for it.
Yeah, so obviously with the Ofqual documentation is very recently out now, and obviously it's finalised that you have a merit, a pass and a distinction, and are not classified for a student who is not engaging with that. Edexcel Pearson have already done a good session on how to use things in the classroom, which is available on their website, and AQA are doing them after Christmas. They've also published a kind of guide for the kind of phrases and grammar points that you need to be able to show your pupils. But I think with regard to providing evidence, you need to make sure that you have something that you can use, because I think most teachers are a little bit scared of not having any evidence. I know I've spoken to some very young teachers, and some teachers even in after 20, 25 years. This is so new to us that we'd never had to not produce evidence, that having something recorded, whether it be on Languagenut or, as Zoe said earlier, whether you have it as an MP3 that they send you from home, or something they do in the lesson, or you take them out in small groups or get them to come after school, because it doesn't have to be something that's done in the lesson. It can be something that's done in an after school lesson or an enrichment club or a breakfast club. Even things just like seeing them on the corridor and when they say to you, hi, this, that and the other. But I think the most important thing is to say to the pupils and share that with the pupils the assessment criteria that is available to see and what they can do, and just make them aware that in the lesson, everything that they do is going to be looked at and goes towards their final endorsed grade. So that way you are keeping the motivation going. And as Zoe highlighted in one of the previous slides, one of the big problems we have is that students are not doing exams. For example, in some parts of the UK, exams have been cancelled. And so it's about keeping that motivation going and empowering them to know that these are the grade criteria that they need to hit, and share that with them and show them what it looks like. But I think you also know your students. You've been teaching them for a number of years, so you know where they sit. And obviously it's about typicality. It's not about a one-off performance. It's about progress over time, and they could hit a merit in one area and then a distinction and then go back down to a pass in another area. So it's actually about the typicality and what does it look like over time. In other words, what piece of the jigsaw, you know, the different pieces of the jigsaw for different things. But if it's something people are really keen to know more about, then I'm more than happy, along with Zoe, to put on another webinar to address that issue. So please drop in the chat if you feel that's something that you would like us to do, and we're more than happy to put that on.
Thanks, Elaine.
Okay. If I could just just one last thing, if I could just add on to that, that's all right. One other tip that you can do, because as Elaine mentioned, what Ofqual are asking for is actually to have this is meant to be a regular thing. It's meant to be what happens in their, you know, their progress through their normal lessons. Although I know lots of people are ending up doing extra kind of exam style assessments, but it's meant to be something that happens in lessons. So one thing you can do actually is, if you've got your mark book, whether that's paper or digital, you could at the end of each lesson just literally take 10 seconds with a highlighter if it's paper, or just, you know, on your Excel if you've got that, or Sims or whatever. It's just to make a little note of with any students that you remember from that lesson having made a kind of decent speaking contribution, and you could use maybe, like, you know, red, green, yellow highlighter or something. Which just means that, you know, if you've picked out 5 students that you thought actually they've said something really, I heard them say something that's really good, over time, if you did that after each lesson, taking 10 seconds, you then actually get quite a nice picture, which really would help you with the endorsement afterwards, if you don't have any recordings, whatever. Not necessarily as evidence that you can show that, but partly for yourself as well, so you can be sure that you're looking at it from their progression over time, and not just the kind of stress towards the end of term when you're trying to get your endorsements together.
Thanks, There's a few quick questions which I think I can answer for you. So the question from Dominique about generating certificates of achievement. Yes, you can do that. In the admin area, you can select a time period for a specific student or a specific class, and it will generate a certificate of achievement for every student within that class, which shows them their amount of points they've earned, their league position, how many medals they've achieved. So you can do that, yeah, for individual students and for entire classes as well. Emily, you've mentioned about the assignment library. That is still there. So I don't know why you can't see it. You said that they were really, really useful, but they seem to have disappeared from your account. So I'll ask if you can send me an email and I'll make sure you can find them again. We'll make sure that they're active on your account. So there's over 150 hours of pre-made assignments for every single language from primary through to secondary, Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. A question about students logging in their phones. So we've got an iPad app, which is identical to the desktop version of Languagenut, and we've got a mobile iOS and Android app, which is purely for assignments. So anything that you set to your students to do as homework or in class, as Elaine said, if students are allowed to access their phones in school, then they can do it on their phones as well. There's a question that came in saying, is Languagenut a useful purely as a homework tool? I wanted to get your, Zoe or Elaine's thoughts on, obviously I know it can be used as but obviously Elaine, you've used it most recently.
Yeah, we've used it quite a lot, and it is absolutely great for homework. And as well, during lockdown, one of our academies, which I know Sabrina, one of your staff, has produced a parent-friendly video, and the parents are now logging in to use that so that they can support their children. And yeah, the homework is great because you can set the assignment when it's due, and then the teacher can see when it's not due, when it's not been done, sorry, and then they can follow that up with the appropriate actions that are needed.
Yeah, and if I can add on to that, so as Elaine said, it's great for homework, but it is also used, it's definitely good to use in the classroom as well. So I know that teachers use it in different ways. So the assignments don't have to be homework. So you could actually assign tasks to be used during lesson time, which is a nice way to get a little, listening comprehension. So for example, if you've got mixed ability classes, you can set listening comprehensions at the same time if they've got headphones and devices. So for example, if you've got a Key Stage 4 class, you've got your foundation group doing one task, you can set them, say like a challenge level 2 task or challenge level 1, and then you could set your higher students challenge level 3 at the same time. And that's a way to get around trying to do different listening exercises at the same time of different levels. So you can absolutely use them in as well. You can use some of them as a quick plenary in the old words, or as a some of those things we mentioned. You can have a do now start as well. So actually they can be used at any point in the class or in the lesson and at home and remotely. So yeah.
Brilliant. I think a couple more before I think we've just gone over the hour. The question about does the teacher have to assign work? The answer to that is no. When students are set up with their logins, they can access all of the resources openly. So if you just wanted to get started on a trial quite quickly, or if you needed to give students access quickly, they log in and they will get open access to all of the resources, which are automatically graded by our system, which is everything other than the writing and speaking open questions within the exam skills section, because that requires teacher input to grade it, and you can send feedback to the individual students as well. One last question is, do we work to a particular exam board, which I think is probably best answered by both of you two, and what about A-level, which is an exciting thing we're actually working on at the moment?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So I mean, the Languagenut team are UK based, and that's, we have quite a few teachers in our team, and the UK is what we know best. So yes, there is probably a slight gearing towards the two English exam boards, plus also Scotland and Wales. But what we've tried to do is to make our curriculum as flexible as possible, so it's not completely tied up. So we go outside what those exam boards ask for, and we have looked at curricula from all kinds of other countries as well, and actually a lot of them have very, very similar topics. Everybody learns about holidays, everybody learns about school, and so on. So we've really tried to compile them and do it so that people using different curricula can use that. Also IGCSE, we have a partnership with Hodder with their IGCSE books, so we do have the exact ones for those as well. Yeah, so there's a mix of them there.
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. And just to say, the A-level product is coming.
Oh,
it's our
yes.
next project.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot about that, but yeah, so we already have
Yeah.
A-level vocabulary, and yeah, we are working on the exam skills section for A-level. So yeah,
Hopefully September
watch this space.
time. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Well, a big thanks to everyone who attended today. We have recorded the session, and the slides will be made available, and the recording will be added to our website and emailed to everyone who registered for the session today.
Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for your useful questions and comments.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.